Hello, and welcome to another session of Excel Programming for Clinicians with me, Dolotan Callum. In this session, we will press on with our exploration of loops by studying the do-until loops. Now, these sound almost the same as the do-while loops and can be used interchangeably, though there are some subtle differences. We use the do-while loops mostly to check if a condition is still true, and we loop until it is no longer true. With the do-until loops, we check if a condition has become true yet, and if not, we loop until it becomes true. Again, we'll look at two flavors of the do-until loops. The do-until loop, which checks a condition at the beginning of the loop and runs the loop again until that condition becomes true. And the do-loop-until, which checks the condition at the end of each loop and runs the loop again if the condition is not yet true. Honestly, most people tend to pick one of either the do-while or the do-until loop based on their personal taste, and they stick with that. Okay, let's start with the do-until loop. As we said, the do-until loop runs until a condition is no longer true, and it checks that condition at the beginning of each loop. So let's declare a variable as our counter, and let's set that variable to 16. So the structure of a do-until loop is we say do-until, and then we check the condition. I want to do my loop until I is greater than 25. I'll write some code, and then I'll loop at the end. So we start by saying do-until. We write a condition which starts off being false, but which will at some point change to being true. We write some code, and then we loop. So we start here with I equal to 16, because I want to start on the 16th row. And then I want to keep incrementing I and running my loop until I is greater than 25. So let's get our cells object. And in the ith row and the fourth column, let's set the value property to some text. And very important, remember to increment the value of your variable. So here we want to do until I is greater than 25. Remember, it starts at 16. And we book an appointment in the ith row and the fourth column, and then we increase the value of I, and then we loop, and then we check the condition again at the beginning of each loop. Let's run the code and see what we get. And as you can see, it starts off with I equal to 16, so it books an appointment for each of these patients until I equals to 25, it books an appointment, and then when I is greater than 25, i.e. when I is equal to 26, then it stops running. Let's see what would happen if I were equal to 16. Let's copy this code, paste that, and let's say we want to check the condition of I greater than 16. So we start off with I equal to 16. What do you think will happen in our loop? Well, the first time we run, I will be equal to 16, so the condition I greater than 16 will be false, and so the loop will run at least once. Let's demonstrate. Let's run the code and see what we get. So it ran at least once, because I started off at 16, which was less than 16, and therefore it ran at least once. Let's copy this code and see what would happen if we were checking the value of the cells instead. So instead of checking I, let's check cells object, ith row, second column, and we want to see that the value, we start off by the value equal to an empty string. So here, we want to run until the value property of the cells object in the ith row and the second column, i.e. our patient IDs, we want to keep running until our patient ID is equal to an empty string. So it starts off by I equals to 16, so it won't be an empty string. And then when I equals to 26, I expect it will be an empty string. Let's run the code and see what we get. And as expected, it books an appointment for all our patients, but it stops on the 26th row because the value of cells in the 26th row and the second column is equal to an empty string. So as with the do-while loop, in the do until loop, the condition is always checked at the beginning of each loop. Let's take a look at the do loop until. As we've said, the do loop until checks the condition at the end of each loop, and so it will run the loop at least once on every occasion. Let's declare a variable to use as a counter, and let's set that variable. So the structure of a do until loop is you write do, you then write your code, and then you loop until your condition is met. In this case, I greater than 25. So the condition is checked at the end of each loop, and the code within the loop is always run at least once. Let's copy our code from before and reuse it here, and this time change the column to column 5. Let's run this code and see what we get. So as expected, it runs for all values of I less than 25. But as we say, the do loop until runs at least once on every occasion. Let's demonstrate that. Let's copy this code, comment it out, and reuse it below. But this time, check that I is greater than 16. What do you expect to happen this time? Let's run the code and see what we get. So as expected, the code ran once, but only once. So it runs the first time, books an appointment, increments the value of I by 1, I greater than 16 is now true, and so we break out of our loop. And as before, we can run this code based on the value of a cell. So if we copy the code we used before, we can do book an appointment and loop until the value of our cells object in the ith row and the second column, i.e. our patient IDs, is equal to an empty string. And since we start with I equals to 16, we expect patient ID to not equal an empty string until I equals 26. Let's run the code and see what we get. And the code ran and did as expected. So that's a very quick introduction to the do until loop and the do loop until. The first version, the do until loop, checks the condition at the beginning of each loop. The do loop until checks the condition at the end of each loop and always runs at least once. Okay, thank you. Hope you found that useful, and I will see you in the next video.